Hey everyone, it's Tom Seymour from VHS Massacre. Just wanted to do a little update and talk about various things. In general, this podcast talks about independent film industry stuff. We do have another show called Video Galaxy where Chris and Chris review films, but it's definitely me-centric. I talk about some of the projects I'm working on, but also the state of American independent film, things like that. So recently I got to interview Lloyd Kaufman, and it was especially meaningful to me because he invited me over to his home, and I was able to go. And although I definitely was there to interview him, I got to hang out with him actually for a little while, and it was really meaningful to me. Like when you start to hit middle age and you have a family, your dreams to some degree get narrowed, and you have less dreams of the sort of less dreams of celebrity and things like that, and you start to think in more practical terms. And what can I dream? What can I aim for, where I would have a reasonable shot? Like you're limited in your time, but you're also not who you were in your 20s, right? So I'm almost 45, right? So I'm not going to be an astronaut, I'm not going to be, like an athlete, So it's like you start looking at what you can do, what you have been doing. And I'm an independent filmmaker. I've produced over 20 films. I've been a producer on over 20 films, and then I've directed 10 features. And so you look at that and you say, okay, how can I make progress within that? Well, the problem is that sort of dream is a difficult one, because real independent films, meaning low-budget films made outside of the studio system without industry insiders, is it's much rarer, and there's much less money in it. And there's only a few big companies left that do it. Like maybe... Like Charlie Band, I think, is doing a streaming service for Full Moon. Troma has their Troma Now streaming service. There's a few companies like East Coast companies like SRS and MVD, but really almost a handful of companies that will produce and distribute a film. So this is a big thing, distribution, right? Because distribution is the equivalent of like signing a book deal, right? So let's say you were an author, and for the last 5 or 6 books you've written, you've always signed book deals for a company to take your book, sign a contract to at least potentially make money, and then to put your film out and to do all the promotion and all that stuff. Well, in the filmmaking arena, that's called a distributor. And my films have had distributors for the past 15 years. So I don't want to be the guy who dumps a film. Like the first thing they do with it is to put it on YouTube, or the first thing they do with it is to just only have it on Prime or stuff like that. So and also the label, to some degree, is an audience base. So for me, Troma is a highly recognizable brand in the horror scene. If you like horror, you know Troma. That's it, period. And if you know your horror, you know Troma. So I didn't get to work with them on past films, but in 2016 I pivoted to making feature-length documentaries instead of narratives, after making 8 narrative features, and just realizing that to some degree the appreciation wasn't there for the sort of no budget feature, because that's another subject too, right? this concept of low budget, right? So in my day, like if you could raise like $250,000 or something like that, they would call that like a low budget, maybe ultra low, but essentially low budget. And now that's considered no budget. And those films are actually hard to raise money for because it's, in general, an independent film is not a great investment if you looked at it purely as a economic endeavor. It's not a great thing to just, and you'd be better off going, investing in cryptocurrency, quite frankly. So there's an issue there. But then too, if you like these like $1 million movies are very difficult to raise money for because like how are you going to get your money out? Physical sales is really where the money is at. And then, so you're not going to get a good deal on streaming. You're not going to make $1 million back on streaming, So, but these films do get made and they get sold to companies that pretend to be independent, like A24. A24 is like the new Miramax, think of it that way. But Miramax was never independent. Miramax was made by industry insiders, and they got, however they got their capital, it was an arm of the studio system, there's no question, because they pumped out so many films. Well, A24 is just like that. These two industry insiders worked for the Guggenheim Partners, which is like a $300 billion company or something like that. And they invest in certain things. So they worked for Guggenheim Partners. They left to start A24, then got funded by the Guggenheim Partners. So almost funded by themselves. And then that's how you get A24. And it's, all the films are multi-million-dollar A-list directors and A-list actors. So how can you, with a straight face, call it independent? You can't. And that's what the independent scene has become, is a smokescreen. Fox searchlights and branches, like Lionsgate and companies like that are sort of paraded around as independent, and they're just really vassals of the major studios. And that comes to a discussion about how many media companies are there. Well, there's still hundreds and hundreds, but the powerful ones that kind of run everything, there's probably only about a half a dozen companies like that. We've added new ones, right? Like Netflix is his own company, and Amazon, of course. But that is, in a way, it's ridiculous. Even a few years ago, some people on Twitter were calling Netflix independent, which is laughable because they're more powerful than Paramount and companies like that. So like they are major studios. So you got things like Netflix and Amazon Prime, and then you have some of the old ones, but those are even owned. So you really have to go and see who owns them. It's like AT&T, Time Warner, it's like NBC Universal, Viacom and things like that. So you get into a situation where you realize that most of the media is owned by a very, very limited amount of people. So how does this tie back into Troma? Well, Troma's by themselves, and although they've had to license franchises like the Toxic Avenger, they licensed Toxic Avenger to make the NBC Saturday morning cartoon Toxic Crusaders, which played, I think it played like right after Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something like that, and they licensed that. They got a little money, but they never lost the rights to Toxic Avenger, and they kept making their own films. Well, with recently they've signed a deal to help produce Toxic Avenger with Legendary Pictures, which that's typically Warner, and they do like the Batman movies and stuff like that. So they've had to sort of sign deals to get some kind of revenue in, because they have to keep the doors open. But they are still 100% independent. They're a tiny company that produces their own feature films. Shakespeare's Shitstorm is the last one they produced, directed by Lloyd Kaufman. And they distribute them themselves too. Distribution is tricky these days. In order to really penetrate the market, you kind of need a middle person. This is something that Lloyd talked about in the interview. You need a middle company. So like Troma worked with FilmRise, and Troma would bundle some films together, and then FilmRise signed a deal to take them in bulk, and then would distribute them through their channels. But that's why my film, VHS Massacre, that's why it got so much exposure. That's why it actually has a presence and people know about it. I'm not saying everyone knows what it is, but a lot of people do. And so that works for me. It's not, being an independent film distributor doesn't mean that you won't have to interact with the studio system. You might have to. There are old examples of Kevin Smith. He made Clerks by himself. That was totally independently made. But when a producer liked the film and got it in the Sundance and it became a Miramax film, they then dumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into cleaning it up, redeveloping the negative and fixing the audio and probably doing some recutting. And they cleaned it up and they made it watchable, right? So then that's an independent film distributed by a studio. That's still independent. But once Kevin Smith started taking the budget from, I think it was Universal Studios with Mallrats, and then his subsequent movies, I think Zack and Miri Make a Porno. Once they start getting bankrolled, the budget comes from something like Miramax. That's no longer independent. And that's what happens with a lot of these films. Although I think Chasing Amy was his own money. I think possibly he bankrolled Chasing Amy and then sold it back to Miramax. To some degree, it's understandable how this stuff can seem muddled, but it's not that muddled. Another example is El Mariachi. So El Mariachi was directed by Robert Rodriguez, totally independently made, independently produced and shot and finished. And he was just going to sell his cheap movies to basically Latino television in California. And it ended up, someone saw it and was impressed, and they, brought it to Sundance. And again, they spent like $250,000 cleaning the thing up. Same thing, redeveloping, cleaning up the audio, blowing it up to 35. Treating it like a multi-million-dollar film. And even though I think he spent $9,000 on the thing initially. So that was legitimately independent. But the minute he makes Desperado, which I think was Dimension, which Dimension I think is like a subset of either Lionsgate or something like that, then it's a studio film. And most of these people who were lauded as independent filmmakers stopped being independent on their second film. But then there's people like Lloyd Kaufman, who essentially has raised his own money and shoots his own film and distributes his own film. Will at sometimes he will have to use a middle person or middle company at some time, but in general, it's purely independently distributed. So anyway, why am I talking about this? Well, anyway, when I was a kid, one of the first films I made was a Super 8 movie. It was called The Nuclear Warrior, and it was me and my friend Craig, and we borrowed my friend Billy's Super 8 camera, and we bought film, and we shot it, and we had to send it away at CVS and get the VHS tape back in the mail, because they would transfer the Super 8 to the VHS. And we got it, and it was, it was unwatchable. It was sort of like claymation, and we used like a Micro Machine City as a backdrop, and and that technically that was my first film, and that was essentially a Toxic Avenger ripoff. Toxic Avenger meets Godzilla or something. And so that's how far back I've appreciated trauma films. I think that was junior high, and frankly, that's probably too early to be watching trauma films. There's a scene in the Toxic Avenger where like a child's head gets run over by a car, so it's not really a kid's movie. And frankly, when I watched it, I knew what the Toxic Crusaders were, and I thought that that's what the movie was. But instead, the movie was this hard R gore fest. But I loved it. Loved every minute of it. I think I could say at this point that Lloyd Kaufman and I are friends, and I think that's true. Although for years and years, I would meet him, and we would, I would go to Troma and shoot things, and work out deals and all that stuff. So I've met him dozens of times at this point. With someone who's had a career that long and someone who goes to these conventions and meets like hundreds of people a day, you always wonder, does he actually know who I am? But this time it really meant a lot. He invited me to his home, and I got there early, and I was like, what do I do? And there was a wine shop, and I was like, oh, I'll get him it's around the holidays, I'll get him a bottle of wine. So I was trying to be slick, and I went to the wine store to get a bottle of like like Francis Ford Coppola wine, right? But I couldn't find it, but I found Herzog, unrelated to the film director, I'm sure, but I thought it was funny, like Werner Herzog, so I brought a wrapped bottle, in holiday wrap and he was really appreciative, and went to his house, and it's a really beautiful house, and we started talking, and basically got to learn a little more about him personally, which was really nice. So I'm going to play a little excerpt. I'm not going to play too much because the main interview is going to be for a documentary I'm working on about independent film distribution.
God damn it. I thought I turned my phone off. I'm sorry. Anyway, I was just playing the clarinet a little bit. You walk in, Tom Seymour, and I couldn't have a nicer guy in my home. Wow. And we don't let many people into our home. We don't even let this clarinet. Anyway, I just destroyed Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger together.
Nice. So yeah, you've been playing the clarinet since you were a toddler, huh?
Well, I played it in the high school band till about 8th grade, and I hated practicing. And I once I got onto you have to get into college. You got to take the SATs. If you don't get 800 on your SAT, you're going to have to commit suicide. That whole. So this was wasting too much time. I regret. But my wife gave me this beautiful new wooden clarinet for Christmas, and I can't play it. I just play it. It's a little bit of physical, muscular memory.
So you're an artist as a kid. Does that carry through to high school or any of that stuff?
No, not at all. I went to a very strict school, Trinity School in New York, which was all boys. And it was like an old-fashioned Latin school. They whacked you in the back of the head. They threw erasers at you if they thought you were asleep. And I wasn't asleep. It's just my eye. I don't know. Somehow he thought I was asleep. The Latin teacher, nice. And which I enjoyed. I actually enjoyed Latin very much. But anyway, it was a strict. They'd pull you if you did something. They'd pull you out by the short hairs here and. We had a shop teacher who'd play patty cake and smack you with a ruler. It was very strict, and it was all about getting into. You have to get into Yale or Harvard, otherwise your life is over. Forget about it. Don't even think about going on with. That was the basic.
So you did. You got your grades and you got into Yale, right?
Yes, I did, and. And then I got there, of course, and it was like more of the same baloney. It was also all boys. Yale was all boys when I was there, and you had to wear jackets and ties to get into the dining rooms, that kind of stuff.
Wow. Is that where some of your part of your persona is often the suit with the bow tie? Is that carried through to that, or
well, that's what we wore. Bow tie wasn't so weird in those days, and it didn't stand out as much as it does today for some reason, and I'm just in the habit of wearing a tie when I travel. In fact, when I was younger, I had a beard, and in the 60s, the cops and the immigration people, if you had a beard, they were after you, never mind what color you were.
So we did the interview, and Patricia Kaufman came in and interviewed her for a minute, and she's the former film commissioner of New York, which is... So that was an honor to speak with her for a minute. I've met her a few times in the past, but just at trauma events and whatnot. They travel together very often, which is very nice. It's wonderful to see. And so we hung out for a little bit, and Lloyd wasn't having any booze, but I I had a glass of wine, and I sat on a chair for a minute. And we talked. And then I packed up and I headed out. The wonderful thing is, I talked about sort of dreams before, and you think about, what do you really want from filmmaking? And I think, you don't want celebrity, right? It'd be nice to make a little money, but I have a job, So when you're making independent films, I'm not really expecting to make much. So I'm sort of resigned to that, which is partially why I've pivoted to documentary, because I like doing it. It feels new. I can be creative over many months and or even years, shoot an interview here and there and build a really interesting story. And so, but you start to think, what do you want? And I think part of it is you want your work known by people you really respect. You might not really know the people who, you might not really know your heroes, right? So people have different dreams. So I have a dream scenario where I'm sitting around, like comfortable chairs, maybe smoking a cigar, drinking some wine, and I'm having a conversation with like something like Ridley Scott or Robert Rodriguez. Mary Harron's pretty badass, who directed American Psycho. George Romero, and of course Lloyd Kaufman. So like it's like a dream scenario of like meeting some of your favorite directors, just kind of feeling like you're part of something, or knowing that they appreciated your work. And the one thing I'll say is that hanging out with Lloyd for that bit, although it was for an interview, it did feel almost like friendship, and we were just talking about movies and stuff, and it was really wonderful. So it definitely fulfilled part of that sort of dream. And he's always very very kind when he talks about the documentaries. He really loves them. He thinks they're well done, and he's glad to have them, and Troma's glad to have them. When I talk with people at Troma, they're like, no, we really like these, And at the end of the day, that's what you want. Like someone who gives a shit about your work and is willing to take a chance on you and put these movies out. Now, some of the younger generation, I know that they're still into making independent films, genre films, horror films. When you're young, you maybe have an overdeveloped sense of how important you are, and you make a film and you try to put it out, and if you don't have distribution, maybe it ends up on something like YouTube, and maybe if you're lucky, a few thousand people watch it. There is the professional arena of filmmaking, and the professional bar has always been distribution. and signing a distribution agreement, even if you're not getting paid, there's the potential to make money. And though you can sign deals, I know some of my friends have signed deals with larger distributors and have gotten money up front and stuff like that. That's harder to get nowadays, but you can do it. And you can find a producer's rep, they call it. And a producer's rep is essentially like an agent for your film that goes around and can sell the film to different markets. And in the foreign markets, there's hundreds of film markets. And so if someone in Spain wants to buy your film to distribute in Spain, maybe they pay you a couple grand to do that, So, there are different avenues, and people do get discovered and picked up. Troma is another thing, much like Roger Corman, Lloyd Kaufman, and Troma Entertainment they serve as a really important part of the industry, because they're essentially, Lloyd describes it as a minor league of filmmakers. So if you look at their roster of people who have had films at Troma, it's Trey Stone, Matt Parker, Eli Roth did some work there, some director's commentary and stuff like that, and continues to do interviews with Troma and stuff like that. You have James Gunn is like the big guy now, who wrote, I think, Romeo and Juliet, and there's a lot of people. They had, I think Sam Jackson, Oliver Stone, I think Marissa Tomei, Debbie Rochon. The list really does go on and on. But basically, in many cases, this is where they got their start, is Troma. And so it's vital. It's vital to have that place to be discovered. And I worry about that. I truly worry that kind of thing is going away. So one of the announcements I want to make is that, so the new documentary I'm trying to make, I'm changing it. And I think I want to concentrate on more about the surviving independent film distribution companies in the United States. It will probably be East Coast centric, although I'm totally open to hearing about West Coast companies. But I'm not really interested in companies that are truly just directly feeding off the studio system. I don't really have an interest in that. But there are some ones that make their own films and distribute their own films. And that's more what I'm interested in. Because if I just concentrated on independent production companies, that's just any person who makes a feature, which is amazing in itself. But the problem is there's thousands of people who make a horror feature, for example. And it's not only too much ground to cover. I don't think it's really what I'm interested in, because there's this industry aspect of it, of the survival independence, And as Joe Bob Briggs say, these independent film producers have to find a way to the market in an effective way. And the ones that have had success, people always bring up these one-off stories of success, whether it's in music or book, putting out a book or whatever. They say, well, look, this person made it. Oh, look, this stand-up comedian, released a comedy special direct to the public and he made $1 million. It's like, well, yeah, but that comedian was made famous by this infrastructure of the studio system. And so you can't count that. You can't count something like that as an independent win. It's got to be someone who's a normal person and has some wild success at releasing directly to the public. And that's much more rare. That's much harder. And sometimes filmmakers just want to make the films, And so that's where a distributor comes in. And that's not to say, I do a hell of a lot of marketing online, social media, the best I can. And I think I'm not great at it, but I'm on most of the social media sites. I think collectively I have over 10,000 followers in various formats, from Facebook page to Twitter to Instagram to Podbean and the podcast, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other places, but so it's something, and I try to promote almost every week. So and that's that brings me up to the VHS Massacre 2 Blu-ray. It's supposed to be released on January 18th, I believe. So you can buy the Blu-ray at like Target and Best Buy, or Trauma Direct, or I think Dawn of the Discs is another badass place. Maybe Blu-ray Digest. Anyway, there's a bunch of places. So you could pre-order it now. I'll add the link in the description. But yeah, so anyway, I hope this has been somewhat helpful. For those who've been in the film industry for 20 years, this may not be all that insightful, but if you're starting out as a filmmaker, and you kind of want to be like the filmmakers that you grew up watching, it may be a harder game just to put stuff on YouTube and wait to get discovered. So there's nothing wrong with that. When I work with Black 20, I did one viral video that had 10 million views, PG 300 it was called. Black 20 got, I forget what they brag about, maybe 100 million views web wide with Emmy and YouTube nominations, and so I'm not sort of ignorant of the power of YouTube. It's just that, I don't know, some of us are just like romantics about the film system and want to participate in it in a way that makes them feel pride, like they're interacting in a professional way. Anyway, so more tidbits of Lloyd's interview to come. I'm not posting any video right now. The video this interview is really precious to me, and I'm gonna put it in a feature-length doc. The other thing is, just if anyone's curious about what I shot with, I shot with a Blackmagic 4K Pocket. I had a Rode mic attached, and then I had a Zoom, I think it's 4HN, for an audio recorder. I just stuck that on a coffee table, and then I had the boom mic on the camera as a backup. So, and then I had it on a monopod. And what else? I shot in ProRes LT 4K. And yeah, so it's interview's going to clean up really nice. I like shooting in 4K ProRes because you can, you could recrop the shot in post and perfect it. And when you shoot in this film format, is essentially like a flat. You're shooting flat, which gives you the maximum amount of flexibility in post-production to bring out different colors in the interview and stuff like that. So I'm happy with the way it came out. Anyway, all right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.